They called him the Dragon, a billionaire so feared that one glance could ruin careers and silence entire rooms.
What
At the
is
Silver
this?
Lantern,
This is
even
not what I
managers
ordered.
bowed,
Take it back.
terrified to make a single mistake. But when 27-year-old waitress Hannah Green faced him, she refused to flinch. One steady gaze, one act of quiet defiance, and the man who controlled everything suddenly faltered. That night, the balance of power shifted, and Hannah's life would never be the same. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What if the man everyone feared was the one person you refused to bow to? The dinner rush at the Silver Lantern began like a storm sneaking over the harbor. First a hush, then the clangor. White tablecloths breathed under the AC vents. Polished flatware flashed like slim knives of moonlight, and the air smelled of charred rosemary, burnt sugar from the creme brulee tests, and a faint ghost of bleach that clung to the tiled corridors. Hannah Green tied her apron with a final tug, fingers a little stiff from rolling cutlery all afternoon. She was 27, new to this gleaming place, and new enough to still feel the uniform against her skin, the crisp cotton biting her collarbone, the black non-slip shoes hugging arches that already ached. She took in everything with steady eyes. The bar's amber glass bottles aligned with military precision, the sconces casting warm, honeyed circles that softened the marble, the way customers talked with their hands when they thought nobody watched. In the service alley, whispers moved faster than plates on the pass. A junior server breathed the name like a superstition. The Dragon. Another swore he'd watched a grown sous chef leave the kitchen in tears last month. A third traced an invisible rectangle in the air, describing the exact angle a wine glass should be turned to avoid glare on the rim or some petty preference only a cruel god could demand. Hannah listened the way you listen to weather, curious but unconvinced. Maybe he was real, maybe he was thunder. Either way, she would keep moving trays and watching the door. The door mattered in this room. It was a portal where wealth and appetite arrived wrapped in cologne and soft leather, where hostesses used their nicest vowels, where managers straightened jackets that didn't need straightening. Hannah set about her first tasks, checking candles for dull wicks, aligning the forks with the fold seam of each napkin, confirming table numbers in a sequence she repeated like a quiet spell. She noticed how the place wanted to be a fantasy. Velvet booths, polished chrome, the murmuring orchestra of conversation, and she felt a small, stubborn pleasure in being the person who made the illusion hold. Her station tonight: 3 four-tops near the window, a 2-top tucked behind a pillar, and the captain's table that sometimes turned into a mountain when VIPs arrived. She rehearsed each table in her head. Walk the arc. Greet with warmth. Offer the sparkling water first. No fidgeting. Keep hands visible and calm. The manager, Gerald Knox, had delivered his reminder an hour earlier in the office that smelled like lemon cleaner and stress. If he comes in, he'd said, not bothering to say who he was, do not improvise. Do not explain. Do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, how I tell you. Smile, but not too much. Keep your voice low. And if something goes wrong, it won't. His smile was the kind that threatened to become a frown at any second. Hannah had nodded, one of those careful nods meant to deflect rather than agree. Beneath the careful nod lived an older habit. She refused to let fear write her lines. The world had taken enough liberties with her script during the long months of job applications, her mother's treatments, the quiet nights of counting bills twice and then again. If a billionaire wanted his fork to salute the moon, fine. She would angle the tine. But she would not tremble. The Silver Lantern's kitchen door swung open like the stage's curtain, and steam billowed out smelling of seared scallops and buttered corn. The chef called, "Pick up," and Hannah moved, hands sure, steps precise, the tray's weight riding the bones of her forearm. While she worked, she noticed everything and filed it away. The couple at 14 was celebrating something. Their joy blew off them like heat, their cheeks high with it. The man at 12 checked his phone after every sip, counting seconds as if time owed him interest. The women at 15 wore identical bracelets that clinked when they laughed, and made her think about choirs of tiny bells. Between trips, co-workers slid past her, their whispers gathering shape. He emailed last time to say the mineral water wasn't cold enough. He measured it. I saw him send back an entire Bordeaux because he didn't like the pitch of the cork pop. He never raises his voice, that's the worst part. He just looks. The dragon had a name, of course, Charles Whitmore, billionaire investor. Boardrooms like chessboards. Articles that spoke of him with an awe that sounded like fear wearing tuxedo shoes. He donated libraries and sliced companies like cake. He was, according to the staff consensus, the kind of man who altered the weather of a room by entering it. Hannah finished resetting the captain's table, then stepped back to see it whole. 2 tea lights aligned with the seam of the runner, crystal water glasses standing at attention, knife blades mirrored so sharply she could vanish into them. She checked the chairs. No wobble. She pressed a wrinkle in the linen until it gave up and lay flat. She breathed once, lifted her chin, and let the hum of the room pass through her like a tuning note. Knox reappeared at her shoulder, voice pitched just above the clink of plates. "Heads up. He's on the way. Remember, follow my lead." He offered a smile that was not for comfort, but to test if her knees would shake. They didn't. Her heartbeat did the simple math of exertion. In the lounge mirror, she caught her own reflection. Dark hair pinned, stray wisp curling at her temple. A face that refused to announce what it felt. Eyes that took in a scene and made a map out of it. A poor girl by many measures. Rent late, cupboards lean, but carrying something she didn't intend to name. A steadiness not even the expensive quiet of this place could drown. The host stand buzzed, radios murmured. A whisper ran along the line of servers as neatly as a spark along a fuse. The door opened. The cool night air folded into the climate-controlled warmth. A man stepped inside who was not especially tall, not especially loud, not flashing a watch like a lighthouse. And yet the room tilted in his direction, as if gravity had been reminded of its job. Charles Whitmore passed the foyer with the effortlessness of an admitted fact. His suit was simple enough to be expensive, his shoes soft on the marble, his gaze moving the way a surveyor's moves across land, measuring, memorizing, judging. He didn't bark. He didn't demand. He just looked, and the room answered by getting quieter. Hannah felt the pressure arrive, the way storm fronts press a palm to your chest. She didn't step back. She didn't glance at Knox. She didn't count her breaths. She kept a neutral stance, shoulders soft, hands open, eyes level, as if she had been born for this minute and all the minutes like it. Her co-workers' attention crowded her periphery. Curiosity, pity, fascination, but she let their emotions slide past like rain on oiled canvas. The dragon turned his head, and for a second, the cold geometry of his gaze found hers. The restaurant held its breath. Forks suspended, murmurs cut mid-syllable, the barback frozen with a tray of clean glasses shining like captured stars. Charles Whitmore's eyes paused on Hannah, and the quiet changed shape. Curious now rather than fearful. She met his look and did not blink. Not a challenge, not a flinch. Simply a human fact refusing to shrink. Somewhere the front door clicked shut against the night. The candles trembled in their cups, and the dragon, still silent, took a single step toward the captain's table, as if to begin his ritual of control, his catalogue of tiny wars. Hannah shifted her weight forward a fraction, the way you ready yourself not to run, but to stand. The room waited for thunder. She gave him her gaze, steady as a hand on a ship's wheel, and for an instant it felt like the weather might be about to change. The subway ride home rattled like loose bones in a metal chest, fluorescent lights flickering as though even they were tired of the night. Hannah sat wedged between an old woman clutching grocery bags and a young man dozing with earbuds still pulsing. The silver lantern's perfume of truffle oil and charred lamb had been replaced by the sharp tang of steel tracks and the faint staleness of recycled air. She kept her arms folded, eyes on the window where her reflection appeared ghostly against the tunnels. The shift tips jingled like meaningless coins in her pocket, barely enough to cover the cab ride she didn't take. When she climbed the narrow stairs to her building, the air smelled of fried onions from someone's late snack, and the peeling banister carried the grit of too many hands. Her apartment waited on the third floor, small enough to memorize in one glance. 2 mismatched chairs by the table, a cracked linoleum counter, stacks of unopened envelopes balancing like dangerous towers. Her mother's cough echoed faintly from the bedroom, and guilt knotted under Hannah's ribs. Treatments were overdue again. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaned her forehead against the door frame, then forced herself into motion. Bills on the counter, electric, past due, hospital invoice stamped in red, pharmacy note reminding her about the next refill. She stacked them all into a neat pile, as if order could shrink numbers. Long night? Lydia's voice came from the couch, where she sat cross-legged in scrubs, hair pinned messily, face pale with fatigue. A nurse assistant at the county hospital, she carried the scent of antiseptic and exhaustion home every evening. You could say that, Hannah murmured, kicking off her shoes. Lydia studied her. I heard whispers again today. Patients talk even there. You know what they call him? The dragon. They say he ruins anyone who crosses him. Hannah, you're playing with fire every time you look him in the eye. Hannah poured a glass of tap water and drank it down like it might dissolve the ache in her throat. I'm not playing with anything. I just refuse to be afraid of a man ordering steak. But Lydia's eyes darkened. It's not the steak. It's what he does afterward. People vanish, jobs disappear, reputations burn. He doesn't need to shout. He snaps his fingers and lives tilt off their axis. Before Hannah could answer, her phone buzzed. A message from Gerald Knox, their manager. If you slip up with him, you're fired. No discussion. Hannah read the words twice, jaw tightening. Knox had always been a coward, his authority clinging to Charles Whitmore's shadow. But seeing the threat in black and white still made the muscles in her shoulders coil. She set the phone down carefully, as though it might shatter if dropped. Her eyes landed again on the bills, on the frail outline of her mother through the bedroom door, her breaths shallow but steady. On Lydia's tired face, etched with concern. Everything pressed in, the fear her manager tried to plant, the legend of the dragon, the hunger of overdue rent, the medical bills stacking higher than any tray she had ever balanced. For a flicker of a moment, she felt the weight of it trying to bend her. Then she clenched her jaw, straightened her back, and let the decision root itself. She would not bow. Not to Knocks, not to whispers, not to the dragon. The night hummed outside her window with sirens and distant laughter, the city restless even at midnight. Hannah stood there in the dim glow, fists tight at her sides, silent but firm. Whatever storm was coming, she had no choice but to walk through it, one shift at a time. And if it cost her everything, so be it. The silver lantern gleamed brighter the following evening, chandeliers dripping with crystal light as though anticipating a storm. Hannah tied her apron with practiced fingers, the knot sharp against her spine. She had not slept much. The hum of unpaid bills and Knox's warning had lingered in her head like a bad melody. But her steps were steady as she crossed the dining room. The whispers started before he arrived. "He's booked table 12. 3-course tonight, maybe 4. Watch the silverware angles, he notices." The staff moved faster, polishing glasses that were already shining, smoothing napkins until the creases looked military. Hannah inhaled the mingled scents of roasted garlic and seared duck, filing them away like coordinates on a map. And then, he was there. Charles Whitmore. His presence spread before him like cold fire, silent but impossible to ignore. Without raising his voice, he shifted the atmosphere. A hush ran down the line of servers. Knox hurried forward, spine bent as if he were carrying invisible chains. Charles lowered himself into the captain's chair with a precision that felt deliberate, his suit perfectly aligned, cufflinks catching the light. Hannah approached with water, her tray level, every movement controlled. She could feel the gaze of the room pressing on her, waiting to see if she would break. The first demand came softly, almost polite. Sparkling water. 42 degrees, not 40, not 45. His tone was the exact weight of expectation, as if the world naturally obeyed numbers. Hannah nodded, carried the order back, and ensured the bottle was tested with a thermometer. When she returned, he watched her pour, eyes narrowing slightly at the rhythm of her wrist. She did not hurry or pause, just steady, unbroken flow into the crystal glass. "Silverware," he said next, not looking at Knox, not looking at anyone but her. Forks angled 12 degrees toward the wine glass. Knife blades equidistant. 1 thumb's width from the plate most servers would have shaken. Most would have apologized before trying. Hannah set the utensils down with precision, checked the angles herself, and then lifted her eyes to him. Calm. Level. No tremor. A faint crease drew between his brows. It was not anger. It was surprise. The entree followed, striped base that had to arrive at exactly 130 degrees, flesh translucent yet firm. The chef muttered curses in the kitchen, but Hannah delivered it without delay, balancing the tray as though the dish were a crown jewel. She set it before him, silent, poised. Charles cut, tested, and paused. Around the table, breaths were held like fragile glass. He chewed, swallowed, then dabbed the corner of his mouth with the napkin. Still no word. Finally, he looked at her again, his gaze sharp as ice under a sunbeam. Hannah returned it, not defiant, not submissive, simply meeting him as one person to another. For the first time, the dragon frowned, not with fury, but with something quieter, heavier. His fingers rested on the stem of his glass, unmoving. He studied her like a man encountering an unfamiliar map, lines he could not read, a path he could not predict. The restaurant waited for thunder, for knives to drop, for knocks to explode in apologies, but none came. Instead, Charles leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving hers. And in that silence, Hannah felt the balance of the evening tilt. Not because he had broken her, but because she had not broken at all. The nights bled into one another, yet Charles Whitmore kept returning. Each time he demanded something more exacting than before, as though testing not the restaurant, but Hannah herself. One evening it was the temperature of the bread. He wanted it warmed to precisely 98 degrees, not a degree more, not a degree less. The next, he ordered wine poured to a rhythm of exactly 4 seconds per glass. A ritual so absurd, the other servers trembled at the thought. Knox barked orders, chefs cursed in the kitchen, but Hannah stayed steady. She moved with quiet precision, her face unreadable, her hands graceful. And each night, Charles watched her with the same piercing attention. He did not smile. He did not nod approval. He simply measured her with silence, the way an architect studies a structure to see if it will hold. Her co-workers whispered about it after shifts. "He's obsessed," one said. "He's trying to break her," another replied. "No one lasts more than a week under that stare." Hannah only half listened. She saw something beneath his perfectionism, a tremor in the way his fingers sometimes tightened around the stem of a glass, as though holding on to control by force. He wasn't just a tyrant. He was fighting something invisible. Back in their apartment, Lydia paced the living room in scrubs, shaking her head. "He's playing with you, Hannah. Like you're a pawn in his game. You should ask for a different station before he crushes you." Hannah folded another hospital bill, tucking it into the growing pile. "If I ask out, Knox will fire me. If I stay, maybe I'll figure out why he does this. Why does it matter?" Lydia's voice cracked with frustration. "You don't have to fix him. Just keep your job and survive." But Hannah couldn't explain the pull she felt, the way his gaze seemed to ask questions no one else dared ask. It wasn't curiosity alone. It was recognition. As if beneath his impossible standards lived a shadow she had met somewhere in her own life. Grief, control, the desperate need not to let the world slip again. Then, one night, came the sharpest test yet. Charles dined alone at table 12, ordering 4 separate entrees, each with contradictory demands. Steak rare but not bloody, risotto creamy but grains still distinct, salmon firm yet translucent, soufflé risen to a perfect 1.5 inches. The kitchen roared. The pastry chef slammed pans. Knox paced like a man preparing for execution. Hannah served every dish with the same composure, her movements smooth even as the chaos boiled behind her. Charles tasted each one in silence, his face unreadable. He lingered longer than usual, eyes resting on her as though trying to decipher something carved in stone. When the check arrived, Hannah slipped it discreetly onto the table. He signed without a word. No tip, as always. She gathered the folder, feeling the faint scrape of something tucked inside. Back in the alley by the coat racks, she opened it. A sleek, matte black business card slid into her palm, the letters engraved in silver, Whitmore Holdings. Beneath the name, a number and nothing else. No money, no thanks. Just an invitation written in silence. Her heart quickened, not from fear, but from the sense that she had just been moved to another board entirely. The dragon wasn't finished with her. He was only beginning. The tower loomed over the city like a monolith of glass and steel, its mirrored walls catching the morning sun and scattering it back in shards of brilliance. Hannah stood at the base of Whitmore Holdings with the business card still tucked in her pocket, her reflection fractured across the building's facade. She'd spent years serving in restaurants, moving through grease-stained kitchens and crowded subways. But never had she stepped into a place that looked this untouchable. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished stone and expensive perfume, scrubbed clean of any human trace. The marble floors gleamed, so pristine she hesitated to walk across them. Receptionists in sleek black suits clicked at keyboards with manicured hands. The lobby itself felt like a museum, towering glass panels, an abstract sculpture of bronze and light, the hush of money moving invisibly above her head. She adjusted her uniform jacket, borrowed from Lydia, one size too big, and pressed forward, her shoes echoing on the marble. The receptionist glanced at her badge. Conference level. Executive wing, the tone was flat, practiced, dismissive. Hannah followed the corridor deeper into the tower, each step making her feel both smaller and sharper. Her heart ticked against her ribs, but her spine stayed straight. The first to meet her was Preston Whitmore, Charles's son. His jawline cut as sharply as the building itself, his blonde hair perfectly in place, his smile a weapon polished for boardrooms. He leaned in the doorway with a posture too casual for the setting, his tailored suit speaking for him. "So this is the famous Waitress," he drawled, eyes sweeping her, uniform with open disdain. "My father's wasting his time. You should know, people don't last long here, especially people who think a steady stare is enough to impress him." Hannah held his gaze, unblinking. "I'm not here to impress you." The smirk faltered for a beat before he pushed off the doorframe. "We'll see." Minutes later, Victoria Crowell appeared, a woman carved in ice. Her silver blonde hair was pinned into an immaculate knot, her tailored navy suit seamless. Even her heels clicked in perfect rhythm on the marble, like a metronome of control. She didn't offer a hand. She didn't need to. "She won't last," Victoria said, her eyes grazing Hannah as though she were an insect pinned under glass. The words were aimed at no one in particular, yet they carried through the hallway, sharp as a knife. Hannah's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag, but she didn't flinch. She kept her chin level, her eyes steady. For a moment, the silence stretched. Then the massive doors at the end of the corridor opened, and the air shifted. Charles Whitmore himself stepped through, every line of his posture composed, his presence commanding without a word. His gaze flicked from Preston to Victoria, then landed on Hannah. Her co-workers at the Lantern had whispered about dragons breathing fire, but here, in the heart of his empire, she realized his true power was colder. It was the way others bent before he even spoke. She refused to bend. Her palms dampened against the bag, her pulse quickened, yet she met his eyes head-on. In that cavernous lobby of marble and glass, Hannah Green, waitress, poor girl, tenant of a crumbling apartment, stood against the weight of the Whitmore empire and did not look away. The silence cracked like glass under heat. Charles's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but enough to break the stillness. "Follow me," he said. And just like that, Hannah crossed the invisible line from the world of waitresses and unpaid bills into the glittering, perilous kingdom of billionaires. The assignment came with the weight of a trap disguised as opportunity. Hannah was summoned to an executive office lined with leather-bound books and city views so expansive they looked unreal. Charles Whitmore stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the skyline as if negotiating with it. "You will organize a reception," he said without turning. "Small, intimate, international clients. It will test your ability to see detail and endure interference." His tone was clipped, but the pause before the last words hinted he knew exactly what kind of sabotage would follow. When he left, Victoria Crowell appeared at the threshold, her smile colder than the steel beams supporting the tower. "A waitress planning an executive reception," she murmured. "How novel." She handed Hannah a folder, sparse, vague instructions scrawled in ink that looked rushed on purpose. Preston leaned against the opposite wall, arms folded, voice dripping mockery. "She's drowning already. Let's see how long it takes." The reception was scheduled in 3 days. Hannah spent every spare hour in the corporate event space, a ballroom of polished wood floors, velvet drapes, and chandeliers heavy with crystals that refracted light into daggers. She walked the perimeter, studying outlets, testing the acoustics, measuring distances between tables like a cartographer mapping uncharted land. Victoria struck first. The catering list Hannah approved vanished overnight, replaced by one with ingredients out of season and nearly impossible to source. Hannah recalculated, calling vendors directly, charming one supplier into rushing a shipment of imported cheeses and convincing another to deliver flowers at dawn. Then came Preston, breezing in during setup with a smirk. "Wrong tablecloths," he said, snapping his fingers. "Father hates ivory. He demands white. Start over." The staff groaned. There were 20 tables already dressed, but Hannah inhaled, steadying herself. She rallied them with calm words, reminding them of sequence and efficiency. The switch was done in under an hour. By the third sabotage, the staff began glancing at her differently, not with pity, but with something like respect. Her patience was unshaken, her instructions precise but never cruel. Where Victoria sowed obstacles, Hannah built bridges. Where Preston sneered, she countered with silence and focus. On the evening of the event, the ballroom glowed. Low candlelight pooled on table runners, flowers arched elegantly, and trays of sparkling glasses caught the chandelier's fire. International guests filtered in, suits pressed, accents sharp, eyes scanning every detail. Hannah moved quietly through the room, adjusting, smoothing, guiding. Her chest tightened, but her face stayed composed. And then Charles arrived. He entered without announcement, yet the air shifted all the same. He walked slowly, eyes scanning every corner, every table, every flicker of a candle flame. The room hushed as though awaiting judgment. Preston stood in the corner, arms folded, lips curved in anticipation of Hannah's failure. Victoria's expression was sharper still, predatory. Charles paused at the buffet, adjusted a glass by half an inch, then walked on. He touched the drape, checked the place settings, lifted a fork to test its balance. His silence was a weight pressing down on everyone, until his gaze found Hannah. She met his eyes without dropping hers, her posture straight, her breath even, and for a long moment, the dragon simply studied her. Around them, Preston and Victoria leaned forward, hungry for collapse. But Hannah did not break. She waited, steady as stone, for whatever verdict he would deliver. The next morning, Hannah found herself ushered into the boardroom of Whitmore Holdings, a place that felt colder than marble. The long glass table stretched like a frozen river beneath fluorescent lights. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in sharp lines, but no warmth entered here. Around the table sat executives in tailored suits, their pens aligned with surgical precision, their eyes sharpened from years of seeing only numbers. Preston lounged at one end, smirking as though he already owned the future. Victoria sat straight-backed, hands folded neatly on the table, her posture a portrait of composure and quiet disdain. Charts glowed across the screen. Mergers, projections, profit margins rising like skyscrapers. Words filled the air like sterile smoke. Consolidation, acquisition, market dominance. Hannah sat near the end, an outlier in her plain blouse, her notebook balanced on her knees. She hadn't been invited to speak. She had been allowed to observe. Or so they thought. Preston's voice rang out, smooth and arrogant. The numbers are all that matter. Efficiency, expansion, control. Strip away the rest, and profit remains. That's the only legacy worth building, Victoria added, cool as ice water. Human factors are irrelevant. People come and go, markets shift, only the strong survive. Sentimentality is weakness. Their words washed over the room, and no one objected. Heads nodded, pens scratched. It was business as usual, bloodless, exact, empty. But Hannah felt the silence closing in, heavy as chains. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment she thought of her mother at home, her labored breath, the bills that piled higher than rent. She thought of Lydia's tired eyes after double shifts at the hospital. People weren't numbers. They were flesh, fragile and fierce, lives stitched together by hope. She leaned forward, voice low but steady. All this talk about numbers. What about trust? What about legacy that isn't measured in margins? What about people? The words fell into the boardroom like a dropped glass, shattering the rhythm. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Every head turned toward her. Preston's smirk twisted into a sneer. A waitress lecturing us on legacy? Spare us, Victoria's lips curved faintly, as though amused by a child's boldness. Naive, she murmured, her tone slicing like a blade. But Charles didn't speak. He sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on Hannah, and for the first time his mask shifted. The stern lines of his face softened, just slightly, as though her words had struck a chord buried beneath armor. The room waited for him to dismiss her, to reassert the cold order of profit and control. Instead, he lingered on her gaze, silent, his attention fixed not on the glowing spreadsheets, but on the one voice that had dared to cut through them. For a flicker of a moment, Hannah saw the dragon falter, not in power, but in certainty. And that single pause was louder than any command. The boardroom emptied slowly, the executives filing out with murmurs sharp as paper cuts. Preston shot Hannah a glare dripping with contempt, while Victoria's heels clicked like punctuation marks of disdain. Soon the glass doors sealed shut, leaving only silence and the city's hum pressing against the windows. Charles Whitmore remained seated at the head of the table, unmoving. His fingers traced the edge of a folder, but his gaze was elsewhere, far past the skyline, as though memory itself lived beyond the glass. "Hannah," he said finally, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard. Not the clipped command of the dragon, but a weary timbre, heavy with something unspoken. "Stay." She hesitated, then walked closer, her shoes echoing on the polished floor. The vast boardroom felt suddenly too large, too hollow, as if its cold perfection had been built to hide something raw. Charles leaned back, loosening his tie, an uncharacteristic gesture that made him look almost human. "Do you know why I demand control?" he asked, not quite looking at her. Hannah didn't answer. She had learned that silence could be stronger than words. He exhaled slowly, the sound of steel bending. "I lost them. My wife, my daughter, car accident. I trusted the courts to hold someone accountable. Instead," his jaw tightened, his hand curling against the table. "The driver walked away with a fine. Paperwork, technicalities. Justice dissolved in ink, and I swore never again to let the world's chaos touch me. So I control. Every glass, every fork, every number, the confession hung between them, fragile as ash. The dragon's armor cracked, revealing not fire but ruin. Hannah stood still, her pulse steady. She didn't rush to comfort him, didn't offer pity that would cheapen the admission. She simply listened, her eyes clear, her presence unflinching. His gaze finally lifted, meeting hers. For the first time, the ice in his eyes thinned. "They all fear me," he said softly, "or flatter me. But you—" He stopped, searching her face as though she carried an answer he'd misplaced years ago. "You see me." The weight of his words pressed heavy, but Hannah didn't shift. She let the silence speak for her, let it hold the grief without diluting it. Charles leaned back, a sigh escaping him like air from a long sealed chamber. For the first time, someone sees me. In that moment, the dragon was no longer untouchable. He was a man haunted, brittle beneath his empire of glass and steel. And Hannah realized the test had never been about water temperatures or table settings. It was about endurance, about whether anyone could stand steady in the storm of his control and still see the man within. The boardroom lights glowed faintly, casting them both in pale gold. The city stretched below like a living organism, restless and loud. But inside, the silence was intimate, almost sacred. Hannah didn't promise to heal him. She didn't speak of forgiveness or fate. She simply remained, steady as she always was. And in that stillness, the first crack of breakthrough widened. The days that followed carried a strange new current. The dragon's edges were still there, his clipped tones, his impossible standards. But something beneath them had shifted. When Charles entered a room now, it wasn't just command that followed. It was curiosity, directed toward Hannah. She learned of the change first, not from him, but from her landlord. An envelope taped to her apartment door read, "Paid in full." Confused, she called the hospital billing office about her mother's treatments. They confirmed the balance: 0. The weight she had carried for months evaporated in a single word: settled. Her knees almost gave out, the relief so sharp it felt like pain. She knew instantly who had done it, though he hadn't spoken a word. The summons came 2 days later. Hannah was called to Whitmore Tower, escorted past marble lobbies and glass elevators to a private office higher than she'd ever imagined. Charles stood by the window, city lights spread beneath him like constellations. He turned, and for once his voice carried neither demand nor judgment. "Your mother's care is secured. No more bills, no more notices." His gaze softened. "And I have something else for you." From the desk, he lifted a folder stamped with the Whitmore seal. Inside, documents establishing a new foundation dedicated to health access and community care. At the bottom, her name was typed beneath a title she never dreamed she'd see: Director. Hannah's breath caught. "Director?" "I need someone unshaken by power," Charles said, his tone firm yet strangely hopeful. "Someone who sees beyond profit, someone who sees people." He paused, the faintest trace of a smile touching his face. "That's you." The door burst open before she could respond. Preston stormed in, his voice sharp. "This is madness. A waitress leading a foundation tied to Whitmore Holdings." "You'll destroy our reputation," Victoria followed, her calm venom more cutting than his outrage. "She's unqualified. Sentiment has no place in strategy." Charles's gaze flicked to them cold as winter steel. Enough. His single word sliced through the room, silencing both. You forget who makes the decisions here. Preston's face flushed, but he dared not speak. Victoria's lips thinned, her silence louder than protest. Charles turned back to Hannah, the weight of his empire balanced in that single moment. If you lead, it must be fair, transparent and real. Can you promise that? Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder, but her voice was steady. Yes, but only if it truly serves people. No games, no shadows. For the first time, Charles chuckled, low and genuine, a sound that felt startling in its warmth. Then it's yours. Outside the window, the city shimmered, unaware that in a single heartbeat, a poor waitress had stepped into a position that could change lives. And behind her, the very people who doubted her stood stunned, watching the dragon choose not another billionaire heir, but the girl who never bowed. The office was quiet long after the confrontation ended. Preston and Victoria had left with clipped steps and stormy faces, their outrage trailing behind them like smoke. Charles returned to his desk, his expression unreadable again, though his eyes flicked toward Hannah with something softer, something almost like trust. But Hannah barely noticed. She stood by the wall of glass, gazing out at the city spread beneath Whitmore Tower. From this height, the traffic lights looked like veins pulsing through a giant body, the skyscrapers like jagged teeth biting into the sky. She pressed a palm lightly to the cool pane, feeling the thrum of the city through the glass. Just weeks ago, she had been wiping crumbs off diner tables and counting coins to buy her mother's medicine. She remembered the grease-stained subway rides, the flickering hallway lights of her cramped apartment, the weight of unopened bills stacked like tombstones on the counter. She had been small then, pressed under the world's heel. Now the horizon stretched before her, and with it came responsibility heavier than any tray she had ever carried. The title of director wasn't just an honor, it was a chance and a demand. She could see Lydia's tired face in her mind, her mother's fragile hands, the quiet despair of people invisible to men like Charles Whitmore. She couldn't fail them. Behind her, Charles spoke, his voice low. You know, this city has always looked like a battlefield to me. But perhaps I've been fighting the wrong war. Hannah turned slightly, meeting his eyes. He wasn't the dragon now, not really. Just a man who had tried to cage grief by controlling the world. She didn't answer him with words. There was nothing more to say. Instead, she gave a small nod, an acknowledgement of what lay between them. Respect, hard-earned and unspoken. The reflection in the glass showed her own face, steady, no longer just the waitress who survived on stubbornness. She had become something else, someone capable of shaping futures, not just enduring shifts. The city pulsed on, unaware of her transformation, but she knew, and that was enough. She let her hand drop from the glass, exhaled, and whispered to herself, "True strength is not fearing power, but daring to face it, and choosing compassion instead." The words lingered in the silence, a promise etched deeper than any contract. Then she turned, shoulders straight, ready to walk into this new life not as a servant, not as a pawn, but as a voice. What hidden strength do you carry that the world hasn't seen yet? Tell me in the comments below. And if Hannah's journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the strength hidden in plain sight.